Hi everybody, my name's India and I decided to do my cultural project on Cuba. So let's get started here. So I'm just going to go over brief history. Up in the right hand corner there's a little picture of Cuba. Cuba is home to 11 million people. It is an island that is located in the Caribbean. It is a very tropical climate. So without further ado, let's get into the history. So the first signs that they saw people were around 1000 BC. That is when they think people first arrived in Cuba. In 12 AD, the Taino people arrived and started cultivating the land and farming. Everybody knows that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, discovering Cuba, and actually that led to the colonization. And through the colonization, that actually led to slavery. Slavery was a huge thing in Cuba. It was one of the biggest slave trading ports, and because of it, one of their biggest imports and exports became slaves and tobacco and sugar. In 1986, slavery was abolished and the War for Independence began. In 1902, they actually won their freedom, but that didn't actually last very long because after World War II in 1956, Fidel Castro takes control and many people leave, fleeing to the U.S. This leads America to try to overthrow Fidel in something called the Bay of Pigs that took place in 1961, and because of that, that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 2008, Fidel Castro retired, leaving his brother the power, and his brother's name is Raul. So let's get into kind of an overview after we went through the history. Cuba is very colorful and lively. Its number one import is sugar, as mentioned before. Its number two import is Cuba. They're known for the Cuban cigars. They are super into music and dance and beautiful colors and festivals, and that's something that I want to talk about next is their love of their festival. So Cuba isn't a very religious country, so instead of a lot of religious holidays, they do festivals, and the first one I'm going to talk about is the Fire Festival, and it is what it sounds like, but much more. So in the picture you'll see there's a picture of them doing a little ritual at night. This is the Fire Festival, or the La Fiesta de Fuego. This takes place in July, and it's actually a celebration of famous political writers and of their African and Jamaican roots. As you can tell by the little faces and the things that they're carrying, very heavily influenced by Africa and Jamaica and the Caribbean roots that they have. So that's an 8-day festival, and every night they just do the Fire Festival. As you can see, the Fire Festival, there's lots of theater, there's music, there's food, and it is just one big party that people travel all around the world to see. The next one I want to talk about is their theater festival, and I thought this one was really cool. It takes place in the capital of Cuba, which is actually Havana. And it's just a beautiful festival where they celebrate the arts. Like, tons of street performers come. They have these beautiful shows going on in their gorgeous theaters, street corners. There's lots of performances going on, lots of food again, live music, all that kind of stuff. They're really, really big into that kind of stuff. The next thing that we're going to talk about is how they dress. Again, like I mentioned, they're very heavily influenced by Latin culture. They're very heavily influenced by African, Jamaican, and Caribbean culture, as well, as you can tell by the way the women dress. They wear head wraps like they do in a lot of times in Africa. Their shirts, they have the big sleeves, and the defined sleeves and the ruffles on the skirts, which are very Latin. And then they have the patterns and the colors that come from the Caribbean or the cultural climates that they're in. Men wear these shirts. It is the most popular shirt in Cuba. They wear it to go out as a dress-up clothes. They wear it to dress down for just everyday wear. It has the 2 stripes in the front, and then it usually has 4 pockets. And young, old, everybody wears this, and this is the most popular men's attire, usually with some shorts if they're dressing it down, or some pants if they're dressing it up. The next thing I'm going to talk about is their literature. The first one is the Cuban refugee children. I actually really enjoyed this because it really helps me to understand, especially during that time of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs, about all the refugees that were fleeing to America, and especially the children that didn't have parents. And so it really talked about what it was that they were going to do to help these children, and how these children reacted in the cultural clash and all that kind of stuff. So it really kind of helped put everything into perspective. The next thing that book that I thought was really good was Cuba: What Everyone Needs to Know. This is a book that was really great because it goes into lots of things. It goes into the history, it goes into the current, it has different interviews with Fidel Castro. It talks about different places to go and the festivals and what the people are like and all that kind of stuff. And it is just actually a really good book if you want a quick overview of everything that has happened to Cuba basically ever. And it just has a ton of information that is actually really great to know. The last book I want to talk to you about is called The Poet Slave of Cuba. And this is a book by Margarita Engel, and she writes books for preteens and teens. She has a lot of really great books. This one I really enjoyed because it's about a slave during that time named Juan, and poems about his life and what it was like to be a slave in that culture. And the reason she writes these books is so that children could really get a feel and understand about where their people came from and how they came to be. And her books talk a lot about these different struggles that these people have gone through. And they're really great books, and I highly recommend her. So the next slide is entertainment. So like most Latin cultures, soccer is big in Cuba, but it's actually only its number 2 source of entertainment. Baseball is actually number 1. Baseball is huge in Cuba. They love baseball, and they're actually really good at it. They go to the Summer Olympics every time there's a Summer Olympics, and they've actually won over 200 gold medals since 1990. And so their team is really great, and people there love baseball. They love soccer, and you can see I have a couple pictures of the kids playing this in the street. Their soccer team is actually pretty good too. Another non-sport that they like to play is chess. They love chess. You will see people, children, elderly, all ages playing chess. They love it. They will set up their foldable chairs or boxes in the park or street corners and just sit and play for hours. It's huge. Again, Cuba's kind of a poor country, so they don't have a lot. So a lot of the kids will play jacks or hopscotch, or they'll jump rope, but that kind of thing is very entertaining. Another thing that they do is this little boy's flying a kite. Kite flying is huge there because it is such a tropical climate. It's very windy. So kids will make kites out of plastic bags they find and string they can find, and they decorate them and out of different pieces of paper and stuff like that, and they kind of fly their homemade kites around. One of the other games that I found was interesting is actually this one that's right here. I cannot pronounce the actual name of it, but it translates to Little Blind Hen. And basically what you do is you put you put a blindfolded person in the center, and then you do a chant, and once the chant is over, the blindfolded person has to try and catch one of those people that are around her in the circle. So it's basically like blind tag, blindfolded tag. So that's one of their big things in Cuba that they like to play. Next is food. So food is big in Cuba, just like, in most countries, food is big. Their flavors, again, are heavily influenced by Latin America and the Caribbean flavors. So they do lots and lots of flavors like that, and spices and things like that. So for my food project, I actually decided to do a dessert instead. A lot of their food, their entrees have bell peppers or red onions and things like that, which I'm actually really highly allergic to. So I decided to go with a dessert instead, and I decided to make a rose con leche. And the reason I decided to do this is because it's like nothing I've ever actually had before. I've seen it everywhere. People talk about it all the time. And so I decided to go through with it. And I was actually really pleased with the result. It was actually very good. At first, the texture was a little off-putting, but I actually ended up really enjoying it. So I just put some pictures there, and the recipe on the screen. Cubans are also really known for their rice and beans. That's a lot of their food is, and chicken. For holidays, they'll roast like full pigs. They, like I mentioned before, they love the different spices. They love spicy. They do roasted plantains, that kind of thing. And so they just really like food with a lot of flavor in it. So beliefs and attitudes. So this is interesting. So Cuba is not a super religious country. Just over half the population is actually claims religious affiliation. So it's actually really interesting. About 52% of them are claimed to be Catholic, and I believe it's maybe another 10% to be claimed to be something else, which in most countries is unheard of. Another interesting fact is actually a lot of their religious holidays were banned while Fidel Castro was in power, and so for more than 30 years they weren't actually allowed to celebrate Christmas or anything like that. Any kind of religious celebrations were actually banned until I believe it was 2008 or 2009 when his brother took over. He finally brought things like Christmas back. Home life, men and women both work, men and women both go to school, but in the home, the gender roles are very traditional. Women do the cooking, women do the cleaning, and they do the taking care of the children. But like I mentioned before, women are also pretty empowered. They work, they go to school, they hold full-time jobs, they get higher education. They're not stuck having to be a mom in the home if they don't want to be. Actually, a lot of the parents of the children take care of their grandchildren so that the moms can go to work. Once the elderly become too elderly to take care of the children, it actually falls upon the children to take care of their parents then. Another interesting thing is that Cuba is huge in promoting body positivity. So men and women are known to be super boastful and very confident about themselves, which I actually think is great. I think we as a country should be more positive about bodies anyway. Their healthcare is free to those that need it because it is a socialist country. It is something that is government run, and they do boast of having a really great health system. Because it is free, people can get healthcare when they need it, and because everybody basically gets paid the same price, they say that they know that they're getting the job done because the doctors actually want to help them, not because of how much they're getting paid. Okay, so education and communication. So Cuba claims that to be very big on education. They have a 97% literacy rate, which is very high for most Latin countries and Caribbean countries. That blows a lot, and even not just those countries, but that blows a lot of countries out of the water. They are super into educating their children. They have sex education readily available. They want to make sure that their kids are educated. Spanish is the main language, but there are two other really interesting main languages on the island. There's Haitian Creole, which is actually slave language that is African and a Spanish combo, which is really cool, I think, and it's actually passed down from generation to generation, and some people still speak it today. The Lusimi is also a slave language that is based off an African language, and that has also been passed down. That one is not as common, but is another language that has been passed down from generation to generation, so some people still speak those languages, what I think is really cool and kind of gives them a connection to their past and where they have come from. Like I mentioned before, Cuba claims to have one of the best education systems in Latin America and the Caribbean. It is one of the only Latin countries that have a higher level education teaching facilities, so like colleges, or recently they've initiated distant education programs, so students can travel and study for a professional career, which is actually really great. So the etiquette, Cubans are actually very informal. They speak very loudly and very fast, so it's hard to keep up with them. They use lots of hand gestures to kind of accentuate what they're talking about, but they don't point. They don't use their fingers. They find that rude. So instead of pointing, they actually will purse their lips to make a point, and then they will use that to point at what they want you to look at. So if you're speaking with a Cuban and they're saying, look at this person over there, they'll purse their lips, and you're supposed to follow where their lips are pointing. They stand very close to you while speaking. They don't believe in a lot of personal space. Their touching is very acceptable. People often greet each other by kissing on the cheeks or leave by kissing on the cheeks. Even if they're not really that familiar with you, if they're excited to meet you for whatever reason, they will kiss you on the cheeks as well. Flirting is something that is highly accepted and almost encouraged in Cuba. Even married men and women will flirt with other married men or women or single people. Like, flirting is a huge thing that's in Cuba. As I mentioned before, their body positivity is very big and they're very boastful, and they just love to touch and flirt away. Taboos is do not blow your nose in public or spit in public. They find this really rude and very, very offensive, and they will get very mad and call you out on it. Do not take pictures without permission. That is another something that they find really offensive. They like their privacy, and they don't want pictures taken of them. Littering is highly against the law. They are very much into keeping their cities clean, and if you litter and they catch you littering, you can get in very big trouble. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is my craft. So I decided to make a kite. So I decided, like that little kid in the picture that I showed you before, I was going to make a kite out of the household items that I had. So I grabbed like a trash bag and some dowels, some string, and some paint to paint my kite. So I started off by making that T and then tying the T together. And the reason that I found out that they tied this is so they can actually adjust the T to make it as long or as tall or as fat or skinny as they want. And you can still adjust it, but it holds it together. Then you're going to go through and you're going to tie all the corners together on the trash bags. And make sure you tie them really tight, otherwise it will break and fly in the wind. And then you're going to cut it the way you want. Mine looks like a little ghost. But then you're going to go through and you're going to tape the corners, and then you're going to decorate it. And then this is me with my finished kite. I will tell you that my kite did not work. And it could have been user error. I've never actually flown a kite before, so it very well could have been me, but I did not get it off the ground. So, in conclusion, I think that Cuba is a beautiful country, and someday I would love to visit it. The people, though poor, and they only live off of maybe $20 a month, but they just love life, and they love being together, and they love experiencing art and culture, and I would love to go and see that art and culture and be part of those festivals and really soak up what they have to offer and enjoy their beautiful beaches. And I just think it would be really great, and I have a whole new respect for a different culture, and I've really enjoyed this assignment. Thank you so much for listening and watching.